You open your eyes. No alarm, no phone, no notifications. Just smoke, warmth, and the sound of someone breathing next to you. The ground under your back is hard, packed earth, dry grass, a strip of animal hide, and 6 or 7 other people are lying within arm's reach. A child murmurs. An old woman coughs. A dog lifts its head near the last glow of a dying fire. Your commute today is 3 steps. From the hide to the fire pit. Here is the thing that should genuinely unsettle you. This is not a camping trip. This is how every human being on the planet woke up, every single morning, for roughly 96% of human history. Your life, the alarm clock, the commute, the open plan office, the Monday morning dread, that is the anomaly. So if there were no jobs, no offices, no calendars, what did people actually do all day? Were they running from predators every single second? And if they weren't, where did all that time go? You probably have a picture in your head right now. Ancient humans, wild-eyed, starving, sprinting from saber-toothed cats, gnawing on raw meat in the rain. Basically a survival horror movie that lasted 200,000 years. That picture is mostly wrong. Here is the thing. An anthropologist named Richard Lee went to live with the Juhoansi, a hunter-gatherer community in the Kalahari Desert in the 1960s. Not exactly a tropical resort. He meticulously tracked how they spent their time, and when he tallied up the hours spent directly acquiring food, hunting, foraging, walking to food sources, the number came in at roughly 15 to 20 hours a week. 20 hours. That is a part-time job at a coffee shop. Now, and this is important, that number doesn't tell the full story. When Lee later recalculated and included food processing, tool repair, and camp chores, the total climbed to something closer to 35 or 40 hours. So it is not as if ancient people spent all day lying around. Nobody credible is claiming that. But here is the difference that actually matters. Their 40 hours didn't look like your 40 hours. There was no split between work and life. Foraging happened in groups with conversation. Hunting was collaborative problem-solving. Tool repair happened while people told stories and watched children play. A Juhoansi woman might spend a morning gathering nuts, then sit for hours cracking and sorting them, while laughing, nursing a baby, gossiping about her cousin's terrible husband. Try doing that in a quarterly budget meeting. A more recent study of the Agta people in the Philippines, a community gradually transitioning from foraging to farming, found a similar pattern. Those who still primarily foraged worked roughly 20 hours a week on out-of-camp subsistence. Those who had shifted to farming, about 30. The foragers had more leisure, the farmers had less, and the burden of the extra work fell disproportionately on women. The ancient day was not empty. It was just not organized around a job. But here's the part nobody expects. If you want real proof that ancient humans had free time, serious, undeniable, carved-in-stone proof, don't look at their weapons. Don't look at their bones. Don't look at their bones. Don't look at the remains of what they ate. Look at something that should not exist if every moment of their lives was consumed by staying alive. Something completely, absurdly, beautifully useless. We'll get there. But first, let's walk through the rest of the day. Dawn. Your morning did not begin with checking notifications. It began with checking whether the fire was still alive. Fire was not decoration. It was the single most important technology your group possessed. Heat, protection, cooking, light, the dividing line between safe and not safe. And in a time before anyone could reliably strike a new flame in minutes, keeping the fire alive was not a chore. It was a matter of group survival. So the first task of every single morning, every day, no exceptions, was simple. Walk to the fire. Check the embers, add fuel. Breathe life back into it. Losing your fire was like losing your roof, your stove, and your security system all at once. Except you couldn't call anyone to fix it. Breakfast, if you could call it that. There was no meal plan, no pantry, no fridge with leftovers. What you ate in the morning depended entirely on what yesterday left behind. A scrap of dried meat, some cracked nuts, a half-roasted tuber. If yesterday left nothing, breakfast was whatever you found in the first hour of walking. Every morning was a fresh negotiation with reality. If your first meal depends on what the planet decided to offer you, is that poverty? Or just a different relationship with food? Hunting, which was absolutely nothing like the movies. If anyone in your group went out to hunt, it didn't begin with a dramatic charge through the savannah. It started with a conversation. Where were the animals last spotted? Which direction was the wind? What tracks looked fresh? What were the herds probably doing at this time of year? Hunting was not mindless violence. It was applied intelligence, tracking footprints, reading bent grass, interpreting changes in the wind, predicting where an animal would be hours before you could see it. Some hunts lasted hours. Walking, waiting, reading the land. Persistence hunting, in some groups, meant following an animal at a steady pace under the midday sun until it collapsed from heat exhaustion. Not because the hunter was faster, because the human body can regulate heat in ways most mammals can't. The best hunter wasn't the strongest person in the group. The best hunter was the one who could think like an antelope. And underneath all of this ran a social mechanic that modern economists would actually find very familiar. Hunting was unreliable. Some days you brought back meat. Most days you came home empty-handed. So when someone did make a kill, the meat was shared. Widely, immediately, without negotiation. Among the Juhohansi, successful hunters were actually expected to downplay their kill. They called it insulting the meat. You bragged. You were a problem. You were humble. You were trusted. Not because early humans were selfless angels. Because they were rational. In a band of 30 people who all see each other every single day, hoarding is not smart. It is social suicide. You share today because tomorrow, you'll walk into camp with nothing. Meat sharing was not charity. It was an insurance policy. One where the premium was a leg of antelope, and the payout was not starving next week. Gathering. The skill nobody gives enough credit to. While some people hunted, others gathered. And gathering was not just picking berries. It was a walking encyclopedia of botanical knowledge. Which roots are safe to eat? Which ones can kill a child? Which berries are toxic this month, but fine next month? How do you process certain tubers so they don't poison you? What leaves reduce a fever? Where do particular plants grow? At what time of year? Near what kind of water? This knowledge was passed from mother to daughter, elder to child, generation after generation, for thousands of years. It was a database of survival information stored entirely in human memory. No library, no manual, no backup. And here is what most people never consider. Gathering was probably more reliable than hunting. More predictable, more consistent, and more calorically important. It was also deeply social, and the conversation never stopped. Women walked through the landscape carrying baskets, talking the whole way. Who was being generous? Who was being selfish? Whose kid was causing trouble? Where the best roots were 2 seasons ago. Information, gossip, judgment, laughter, all flowing through the same footpath, all day long. Hunting was the gamble. Gathering was the guarantee. Children didn't go to school. But that doesn't mean they didn't learn. There were no classrooms, no desks, no grades, no standardized testing. Kids learned by following adults. They watched their mothers identify which plants to pick and which to leave. They mimicked hunters reading animal tracks. They tried, and failed, and tried again, to napstone tools. They listened to stories around the fire that taught them which animals to fear, which people to trust, and why you never take more than your share. The curriculum was the world itself, and the test was whether you survived it. Real environments, real feedback, real consequences. And then there were tools. Stone knives didn't sharpen themselves. Spear points cracked. Handles came loose. Hide cords frayed. Baskets wore through. Every object in your material world had to be made by hand, repaired by hand, and eventually replaced by hand. Ancient life was not a world where things simply existed. It was a world where everything had to be continuously maintained into existence. How many people alive today could build, from raw materials, even one of the objects they use every day? Now, the evidence that shouldn't exist. Remember what I said earlier. If ancient humans really spent every second of their day on survival, there is a category of objects that should never turn up in the archaeological record. Here it is. Shell beads. Tiny marine shells. Each one carefully pierced with a stone tool, strung together, sometimes coated in red ochre, found in caves in Africa, some dating back over 75,000 years. Somebody sat down, selected those shells, punched holes in them, and threaded them onto a cord. Not to eat, not to hunt with, to wear cave paintings. Animals and human hands, painted deep inside rock walls in Indonesia and France. Some over 45,000 years old. These weren't quick scratches. They required planning, fire for light, pigment preparation, and hours of careful work in cramped, dark spaces. Somebody crawled into the belly of a cave and painted a wild pig so beautifully that it still looks alive today. Bone flutes, carved from the hollow wing bones of vultures, found in caves in southern Germany, about 40,000 years old. Someone, in the middle of an ice age, understood pitch, understood finger spacing, and sat by firelight to make music. None of this makes survival sense. All of it makes human sense. These objects mean one thing. These people had time. They had energy. They had a need, a psychological need. That went beyond calories and safety. They were not just surviving. They were making life feel human. And then came the part of the day that modern people find hardest to understand. The afternoon. After the food was found, the tools were mended, the fire was fed. People did something radical by modern productivity standards. They rested. They sat in the shade. They napped. They groomed each other's hair and skin. They played throwing games and wrestled. They told dirty jokes. They held babies. They tended to the sick and injured. They stared at the sky. They did, by any modern efficiency metric, absolutely nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. In a world without police, courts, banks, contracts, or insurance companies, your relationships were your entire safety net. The person sitting next to you might share food with your children next month. The person whose hair you're picking through might defend you in a dispute next week. The person you made laugh this afternoon might carry you home when you twist your ankle tomorrow. If your relationships are your only security system, is sitting around grooming and talking really doing nothing. And here is the part that weakens the idea that this is some uniquely human invention. It isn't. Chimpanzees, bonobos, and other primates spend huge chunks of their day on social grooming, not primarily for hygiene, but to build and maintain alliances. Research by Robin Dunbar across dozens of primate species shows that grooming time increases directly with group size. The bigger the group, the more social maintenance required, just to keep things from falling apart. Humans didn't suddenly invent social bonding. We inherited it from a lineage millions of years old. And then we upgraded the technology. From grooming fur to language, gossip, humor, music, stories. Eventually, to sitting around a fire at night, talking about things that don't physically exist. Dusk. Everyone came back to the fire. During the day, conversation was practical. Where is the water? Is that wound healing? Which way did the herd move? But at night, with the darkness pushed back to the edge of the firelight, something shifted. Stories got longer. Jokes got wilder. Someone described a dream they'd had. Someone hummed a melody their grandmother used to sing. Someone told a story about a greedy ancestor who refused to share, and everyone listening understood, without being told, that the story was really a warning. Rules weren't written in laws. They were buried in narratives, and the punishment for breaking them wasn't jail. It was becoming the bad character in next week's story. Fire didn't just cook food. It cooked culture, morality, memory, identity, fear, humor, hope. None of it passed down through textbooks or classrooms. All of it transmitted through voices in the dark, faces lit by a single flickering circle of light. The day ended where human meaning began. And when people finally slept, they probably didn't sleep the way you think. The historian Roger Ekirch uncovered over 2,000 references to something called first sleep and second sleep. They span centuries, continents, and languages. The pattern looks like this. Pre-industrial humans went to bed in the early evening, slept a few hours, then woke around midnight. They'd stay up for an hour or so, tend the fire, talk, think, check on the children. Then they went back to sleep until dawn. You call it insomnia. Your ancestors probably called it Tuesday. To be fair, some scholars have recently questioned whether segmented sleep was truly universal or more common in certain climates and latitudes. The evidence is extensive, but the debate is ongoing. Still, the broader point holds. The assumption that you're supposed to sleep in one unbroken 8-hour block, and that anything else is a medical problem. That is a modern construction, not a biological law. What does it say about us that we've turned the sleep patterns of most of human history into a medical diagnosis? So here's the question you've been circling the whole time. If this way of life worked, if it sustained human beings for hundreds of thousands of years, why did we stop? The honest answer is, we didn't exactly choose to, and the change, once it started, could not be undone. About 12,000 years ago, some groups of humans started planting seeds. Agriculture. It is commonly framed as humanity's greatest upgrade. The moment we progressed from primitive foraging to civilized farming. Textbooks practically play triumphant music when they get to this chapter. But here is what actually happened. Agriculture could feed more mouths per acre of land. More mouths needed more grain. More grain required more planting. More planting supported still more people. And then it was too late to go back because there were too many mouths to feed without the fields. This wasn't simply progress. It was a trade. Agriculture gave humans surplus, storage, cities, writing, and eventually everything we call civilization. That matters. Nobody is throwing that away, but it also changed the meaning of time. Farming brought surplus. Surplus brought ownership. Ownership brought hierarchy. Hierarchy brought chiefs, taxes, armies, walls, specialization, and eventually, your Monday morning alarm. The AgTA data confirms the pattern. The groups that farmed didn't gain freedom. They lost leisure. They worked harder for longer, on more repetitive tasks, with less dietary variety, and the women bore the heaviest cost. Agriculture did not free human time. It captured it. Work, as a structured, scheduled, externally imposed system, was not the default human condition. It was a later invention, and a very recent one, by evolutionary standards. So, let's come back to you. You, probably on a screen right now, probably between tasks, probably inside a building that assumes your time belongs to someone else's schedule. Ancient life was not paradise. There was hunger, disease, cold, violence, and no second chances for a broken bone. Nobody is romanticizing that. But for the vast majority of human existence, a span so long it makes recorded history look like a footnote, people woke up into a different world. A world of faces, weather, skill, danger, beauty, laughter, and shared time. They did not sell their hours, they lived them. Then we built a world where time became something to measure, manage, and sell. And we've been running that experiment for about 4% of the human story. So the next time Monday morning arrives and something deep in your body quietly says, "This doesn't feel right," listen to it. That feeling is not laziness. It is your ancient body remembering a different kind of day.